Welcome to this explainer. Let's jump right in and uncover some genuinely dangerous illusions hardwired directly into our own minds. Today, we're exploring a phenomenon that completely warps how you view your past, how you make sense of your present, and honestly, how you attempt to predict your future. You probably think you're the sole author of your decisions, right? But I want you to really ask yourself this right now. Are you truly in control, or are your thoughts being subtly guided by cognitive traps you don't even notice? Because the truth is, we go through our entire lives carrying around these mental shortcuts that massively influence our day-to-day thinking, totally without our permission. The reality is, you're infected with a cognitive virus, one that literally overwrites your memories and forces you to see perfect order in total chaos. I like to call it the narrative virus. It's this overarching evolutionary glitch in human psychology, heavily documented by Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman, by the way, where our brains aggressively filter out the messy randomness of reality and replace it with a smooth, perfectly logical story. And listen, it's a universal human condition, not a personal failing, but it fundamentally distorts reality. Section 1. Patient 0. The mind. So, inside your head, there are basically two competing voices. Think of them as System 1 and System 2. System 1 is fast, automatic, highly emotional, and it absolutely falls right into the virus's trap by craving smooth stories over hard facts. Basically, if a story feels smooth, System 1 just accepts it as true. Then you have System 2. This is your slow, deliberate, logical thinker. It weighs the pros and cons, checks for mistakes, but here's the catch. System 2 is kind of lazy, and its energy is a very limited resource. So most of the time, it just goes along with whatever neat little stories System 1 feeds it. And because System 1 loves a good story, it creates symptoms like the clustering illusion. Your brain is essentially a master pattern recognition machine. This specific symptom is exactly why we see faces in clouds, or, a religious figure on a piece of toast, or predictable patterns in completely random financial charts. Our brains just hate randomness. If you look at a random string of X's and O's, your mind will automatically try to invent a rule to explain the sequence, even when absolutely none exists. This constant need for patterns creates a massive core conflict in your mind. You are constantly forcing messy, objective facts into a neat, oversimplified story that feels true but really isn't. The real world is full of uncertainties, extreme complexities, and just plain blind luck. But our brains reshape these unpredictable events into what's known as the narrative fallacy. We strip away the randomness and invent a nice cause and effect storyline, simply because it feels safer. It gives us this cozy illusion of control. Section 2. The predictability illusion. Let's take a complex historical reality, like the lead-up to World War II. On the ground at the time, it was a totally chaotic web of uncertainty, doubt, and complexity. But after the fact, the virus gets to work. It takes the final outcome, completely deletes your previous state of ignorance, and turns the messy reality into this neat sequence of events that everyone claims they absolutely should have seen coming. Psychologists call this the hindsight bias. It acts literally like a computer virus that deletes your previous state of knowledge, distorting your memory to make you think you predicted the outcome all along. It retroactively updates your brain, making past events seem incredibly clear and entirely inevitable. And you want to know the scariest part? This memory distortion almost always shifts in your favor, making you dangerously overconfident in your own foresight. Come on, we have all said or heard this exact phrase. I knew that was going to happen. Just think for a second about how often you actually use that phrase. Whether it's a sudden stock market drop, an election result, or even just two friends breaking up. People love to play the expert after the event has occurred. But that's just the hindsight bias making us wildly overconfident in explaining why something transpired. You didn't actually know. Your brain just connected the dots backward and hid the evidence of your initial uncertainty. And this hindsight creates a massive pitfall we call the historians as prophets trap. We mistakenly use history as a crystal ball, completely forgetting that the biggest market shifts and crises are almost always unprecedented. We just assume that because we can perfectly explain the past, thanks to our trusty hindsight bias, we can therefore predict the future. But the reality? The most impactful events, the ones that truly change the world, are complete surprises. They simply do not follow historical rules. Section 3. How the virus spreads. So, how does this mental glitch transform into a massive social contagion? Well, it happens through something known as an availability cascade. This is where people adopt a belief not because it's actually true, but simply because it is popular and repeated constantly. See, our brains don't judge the likelihood of something happening by looking at data. Nope. We judge it by how easily an example comes to mind. So when the media repeats a story over and over, it becomes instantly available in your memory, kicking off a self-sustaining chain reaction of fear. Think about the classic urban legend of razor blades and Halloween candy, and how it ballooned into nationwide panic and actual government intervention. It always starts as a minor, isolated event. Then the media inflates it. Soon enough, there are breathless stories about worried parents, which leads to national broadcast, public panic, and eventually homemade treats getting entirely banned from trick-or-treating nationwide. It is an enormous overreaction to a mathematically tiny problem, driven 100% by how available the scary story is to our minds. To put that into perspective, your chances of getting attacked by a shark in Australia are roughly 1 in a million. But even if the actual odds of a shark attack are that incredibly tiny, seeing one vivid news story makes the information readily available to your brain, which wildly inflates your perceived risk. If a friend of a cousin gets attacked or a local news station runs an hour-long special on it, your fear skyrockets. The objective facts haven't changed one single bit, but the narrative virus has completely overwritten your rational risk assessment. And obviously, modern social platforms completely supercharge this spread. They trap us in echo chambers, where frequent repetition makes total falsehoods completely indistinguishable from the truth. The algorithms figure out what stories your system one likes, and they just feed them back to you, endlessly. As these ideas are shared and repeated, any divergent outside-the-box thinking just disappears. Like Daniel Kahneman noted, a highly reliable way to make people believe in falsehoods is frequent repetition, because familiarity is not easily distinguished from truth. Your perspective just becomes dangerously, extremely narrow. Section 4. Curing the narrative virus. All right, so how do we fix this? To stop the virus of blind optimism before it totally ruins your decisions, psychologist Gary Klein developed an amazing tool called the pre-mortem technique. When we're caught up in a really great story about how successful our next project, investment, or life choice is going to be, we are totally blind to the risks. The pre-mortem is designed to deliberately snap you out of that spell. Here's how you force your brain to surface hidden risks and actually balance all that optimism with some harsh realism. Before you commit to a major decision, gather your team or honestly just sit down by yourself and imagine it is exactly 1 year later. Now, assume your master plan has been a total disaster, completely failed. Your job is to write down the story of exactly what went wrong. By shifting your brain from what could go right to explaining a guaranteed failure, you completely bypass your blind spots and uncover the messy realities you were actively trying to ignore. Ultimately, to truly cure yourself, you've got to widen your perspective, expect setbacks, and truly accept that you cannot predict the future. You need to use broad framing, evaluating decisions as part of a larger pattern rather than reacting to isolated emotional events. You must learn to think gray, stepping out of those comfortable black and white echo chambers to explore the nuance in between. Actively do the hard work of seeking out disconfirming evidence. Literally look for information that proves you wrong. And above all, humble yourself to the profound reality of randomness, chance, and luck. So I'll leave you with this to ponder. The story your brain tells you is comfortable, for sure, but it is rarely the whole truth. Understanding these mind traps is the absolute very first step toward becoming a rational, independent thinker. So what's it going to be? Will you continue living in a neat, predictable illusion, or are you brave enough to embrace the messy reality of chance? It's time to take back control of your mind.